So I was 360 pounds as a teenager. By the time I was 17, I was tipping the scales, obviously over 350 pounds. A series of events led me to the epiphany to recognize that if I didn't make changes, I probably wouldn't live to see my high school graduation.
Welcome to the Most Days Show. I am your host, Brent Franson. The mission of Most Days is to increase quality and length of life globally. So this show is devoted to understanding how change happens. Today, we speak with author and coach Charles D'Angelo. Charles is the author of two books. Think and Grow Thin was his first book about weight loss. And the second book is called Inner Guru. Charles has an incredible personal story. He, as a teenager, was about 360 pounds when he had this breakthrough that if he wanted to help the people around him, particularly a mother who was struggling, that he needed to help himself. And he very quickly lost 160 pounds. And he has maintained, he's in incredible shape. If you watch it on YouTube, you can see he's impressively fit. But Charles is one of those in the trenches thinkers who does a great job of highlighting his system for making change, how he thinks about helping people go from being very obese to changing their diets and losing the weight to exercising in a way that helps them lose the weight. And so I found him to be a wonderful guest, an inspiring guest, and I think we can all learn a lot from him. So for somebody who is on that weight loss journey and wants to drop some weight, I think there's a ton to learn from Charles, but also for anybody who's just trying to be healthy. He's really inspirational. And most importantly, he's a systems thinker. He's thinking and talking about not just the goal of losing the weight or being healthier or living longer, but the systems that you have in place to make it easier for you to do the things that are right for you. He's a wonderful guest. Hope you enjoy. Charles D'Angelo, welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Brett.
So you're an author, you're a coach. I think today we're primarily going to be talking about weight loss, diet, exercise. You've got your own personal experience there that's led into a philosophy you have about staying healthy and fit. And so I'm excited to dig in and pull that all out of you. But just give us a sense of what's your quick potted bio.
So I was 360 pounds as a teenager. By the time I was 17, I was tipping the scales, obviously over 350 pounds. Things that most people take for granted: walking upstairs, approaching other people, tying my shoes, getting from the car to the curb. These are all challenges for me. I was an exceptional student, and from all appearances on the outside, from a persona perspective, most people would say, man, he's got a lot going for him. But on the inside, I was crumbling. And a series of events led me to the epiphany to recognize that if I didn't make changes, I probably wouldn't live to see my high school graduation. So in a short period, I lost 160 pounds all naturally through changing my relationship with myself, with food, with exercise. I realized, having tried everything else out there, there was something missing. I mean, if a diet book, if a piece of exercise equipment, if some magical pill or potion was the answer, I don't think I would have had the problem I had. I don't think so many people who come to see me would have the problem that they struggle with until they come upon my work. So I realized there was something missing. That missing link is, how do you really change the relationship you have with yourself, with food, with exercise? How do you change your mindset so that all this comes together and you learn to stay consistent? You don't find yourself going back to using food like a treatment plan in the face of the givens of life that we all encounter.
Okay. And then, so let's quickly talk about teenage obesity. So what led to you becoming, so overweight at such a young age? And how do you think about the role between just genetics, just like, I don't know, you come from a big family, you were eating the wrong things and you weren't exercising? Because I think at 16 or 17, I don't think I could have been 350 pounds if I tried. And so there's got to be some genetic differences, I would assume. So how did that happen to you as a teenager? And how does that happen to teenagers, more broadly?
There's a lot packed into what you just said. First off, I don't think anything happens to any of us in the major sense. I would say that 99% of how our lives go is a function of choice. Certainly genetics have a part to play. Certainly environmental influences have a part to play. But, and I would say there's a small percentage that are acts of God. Things that are totally outside of our control. We're dealt a certain hand of cards and we contend with what is in front of us. In my circumstance as a child, I was always bitter than all the other kids. I could have been the king of excuses. First off, I grew up in a family where my mother struggled with alcoholism and prescription drug abuse. My father was a well intended, blue collar, hard worker, not very emotionally adept. And I was a very sensitive, very intellectually oriented kid. I could have looked around me and come up with any number of excuses for why I was eating the way I was eating. And the truth was, I was being terribly inconsistent in regard to what I was putting in my mouth, and I wasn't active. There are all sorts of reasons for that. I do my best when people come to see me to help them avoid getting stuck in the mud of their history, because it's very easy to come up with a story to support choices that aren't at all constructive. And I'm not minimizing the type of difficulties I went through or that any client might go through. And it's all too often the case, if not invariably, that when a person struggles like I did, I was 360 pounds as a kid, it's never about the food. It's always about what a person's trying to ineffectively accomplish through using food. So I'm sure now, in retrospect, as an adult, I was using food as a treatment plan. I was trying to maybe anesthetize, pacify, console, distract myself from the chaos that was around me. But we have to be careful in letting that story become our future. We have to be very careful not to reify or concretize this, because if we do, we'll just allow our biography to be our future. And so it's really important to recognize most of how our life is going, most of how my life was going at the time was a function of choices. So it was the choices I was making. It was a lack of education. I didn't know how powerful nutrition could be in one's life, that how we feel, how we move, 80% of any type of fitness or physical outcome that you're after is going to be a function of what you're doing in terms of habits with regards to consumption food. Everyone thinks it's a gym, but that old axiom, you can never outwork a good diet, is a good one to remember. You have to really think about what you're doing outside of working out, lifting weights, working with a trainer. And so much of our time is spent at home and spent responding to things that happen every day.
But in your case, if I were to boil down what you said, you basically are saying that you were addicted to food. That, whatever, things happen in our lives and we numb ourselves or distract ourselves in various ways. And in your case, you were using food as a medication and doing that over, your childhood, basically culminated in you being, so overweight at a young age.
So I'm one not to throw around a term like addiction loosely, because I certainly think that my use of food was something that once I recognized the direction I was headed, I could exert a certain degree of discipline, of influence over. This was something that was conditioned. It became something that was just familiar. And once I upgraded and became aware of an alternative, recognizing that there was a path, that it wasn't so much about breaking habits as it was replacing those things that weren't working with things that would, that my life changed for the better. I think addiction, all too often, people come up with an idea that this is something above and beyond what they're capable of taking charge of. We can all become addicted, get into an addictive pattern with any number of things that meet our needs. To categorize it as, clinically an addiction, I wouldn't go that far. I think that I had a pattern of behavior that was unsophisticated. And I think if a person understands what they're really trying to accomplish, albeit in a low resolution way, like I was with food, and they find a better way to meet their needs that doesn't come at the price of their medium to long-term goals, they'll start to do those things. I think that we all are motivated with positive intention, even if it doesn't seem obvious to us. And the work in my office here and with clients is helping uncover what is it that you're actually positively trying to accomplish through what you're caught up in. I wasn't thinking as a child, I don't think any of us, I mean, our brains don't even fully develop until about age 26. I wasn't thinking about mortality. I wasn't thinking about shaving years off of my future. I think that much of what was driving me was immediacy, thinking about the now without regard for medium to long-term goals. And so any of us who begin to shift and think, where am I going to be 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now, a year from now, can begin to make better informed decisions, because at that point, our entire strategy has to be updated. But if we don't give much consideration in the future, we're going to be stuck into whatever the pattern is that we've been in for a long time.
And so what I hear you saying about not liking the term addiction, and this seems to be thematically run through your work and your philosophy, which I very much agree with, which is, hey, be careful of words and be careful of mindsets that indicate something outside of your control, that it's the addiction's fault that this is happening, or it's your childhood, it's that. And so of course those pieces have an impact, but the way in which we view the world, the way in which we think about the world, those things really matter. We can come from a difficult childhood, or we can come from a place where we were eating a lot, and we have the ability to change that. And so we want to be really careful about things that make us seem or feel like victims, because that's not going to be productive towards achieving our goals. Does that resonate?
Somewhat. It's not about not liking the term addiction. I believe that there are true addictions that people need very serious intervention with. I just don't happen to believe that what I experienced fit for that. And I would say that most of my clients that come here come with a sense of hopelessness. They feel like they've tried everything and nothing works. And it's very dangerous to think of two things. One, that you don't need help. All of us need each other, and each of us need all of us need each of us is something I always like to tell people. So we are interdependent. I think what you want to ask yourself is, what are the needs that you're trying to satisfy? What are you trying to accomplish? And then ask yourself, what would actually be a benefit, an investment, something that would be productive without the types of ramifications of overeating, abusing drugs and alcohol, the things that some of us can get caught up in when we get mired in our circumstances, and begin to integrate those types of choices in our life. That requires a trust in yourself, as well as a trust in something greater, and a trust that you can handle what comes up in the absence of what you've been using to perhaps give yourself a sense of certainty or security. You mentioned a really important word in what you said, which was control. And as we grow into adults, we recognize that we can't control other things. The best we can hope for is influencing. Through influence, we can hope to shape our lives, but there are things that can happen to any of us at any time that we can't control. So what I encourage people to do is to develop a healthy relationship with themselves, so their capacity to handle those things that show up every day isn't a function of needing something like food or whatever the case might be, that they've long used in a way of kind of keeping themselves unaware of what's really bothering them. So it's really about not becoming less afraid, but becoming more courageous. It's noticing I am intimidated by the idea of no longer using food the way I have. And the way I'm going to actually outgrow that, not get rid of it, but outgrow it, is confront that, admit that to myself, let myself feel what I'm feeling, and act in spite of the feeling, which is kind of the antidote to fears like that.
What was the moment for you? I mean, it's pretty remarkable that you were as obese as you were as a teenager, but that you were able to lose the weight naturally really quickly. So what was the aha moment for you? How old were you? Like, what was the turning point?
So there are a number of events that led me to recognize the seriousness of my circumstance. At about 16, 17, I started to realize that my efforts at changing myself through changing everything around me were failing. And how many of us try to change everything but the one thing that's really going to have the biggest impact? Us. And so I was trying to save my mom from herself. There were many times she was in jail, she was in the hospital, more of the hospital than any issues with the law. But it was a terribly scary, unpredictable, uncertain time. And as a kid who was, as all of us are, dependent on my source, my parents, we almost instinctually do all we can to keep that source available, no matter how fraught that relationship might be with complexity. But I realized when I was 16, 17, that that wasn't going to do it, that if my life was going to be different, things had to change. But the thing that had to change was myself. And I had guzzled down an entire career of regular soda, an entire pizza one night, and I dozed off to sleep only to get up a few hours later to turn the television off, but I could not even see the screen. It was all blurry. And I had read that diabetes, high blood sugar could cause issues with eyesight. And my grandparents, my father's parents, both suffered with diabetes. And it scared me. That next day, I was in a class getting ready to take an exam, and my heart started just beating out of my chest. And I was dripping sweat. The nurse had walked by the door of the classroom and kind of peeked in and motioned for me to come out to her. And I wouldn't because I was too afraid of what the blood pressure reading or whatever would say. So I just realized at that point that things were very serious and that it wasn't going to be because my family was going to change or the neighborhood I grew up in was going to change or any of that. It was going to be a change in my philosophy, my attitude, and ultimately my choices.
Now, it's pretty remarkable for somebody as young as you were. And just before we kind of move forward through the journey, do you come from a family of people who are obese? Does obesity run in the family? Are you kind of bucking a familial trend, or had you charted your own path to your excess weight?
Yeah, I always tell people, clients in specific, when they say, I come from a family of obesity, I always say you come from a family of certain habits. Cookies don't fall from heaven into our mouth and cause us to be 400 pounds. Yes, can there be some type of genetic basis for some disposition to certain traits? I'm sure of it. That's not to say there's a tremendous amount of science and literature about epigenetics now, about the environment and the influence on our genes. So my philosophy is I came from a family of terrible habits. My father's family were all morbidly overweight. Him and his brothers and his parents, they all had heart issues. Could that have some type of genetic basis? Sure. But you're talking about going through Burger King and McDonald's and Jack in the Box and regular soda and coffee with 7 packets of sugar in it and white bread. So you'd have to ask yourself, if that same group of people were given a different set of choices, if they had eaten like I eat today or like my clients eat, what would the output be? Would they still be morbidly obese and stricken with all sorts of lifestyle illnesses? I don't think so. And so I'm tremendously positive about the impact of our choices on the way we show up in life.
And so, I mean, I can tell just looking at you, and you're only shoulder up, but that you're strong and you're fit. Like I can see your, I don't know what these are, your delts. I can see you're very muscular. And so clearly there's a dramatic transition if you're losing 160 pounds. I mean, did you kind of just replace the numbing with the food, with, just, I don't know, spending time in the gym and exercising and eating well? Like, did you just kind of hot swap one for the other? I don't want to oversimplify it. Like, what did you do to lose the 160 pounds?
I did exactly what I teach all my clients to do. You can go on my website or on YouTube. It comes down to 2 primary mechanical things. The first is create a very compelling vision for yourself. It's very difficult to make any shift in your behavior if you don't have something that's calling you forward. So you really have to sit down. And if you're in an environment that doesn't have a lot of examples of success or fulfillment or achievement, fortunately, now with technology, you can have access to all sorts of people from all sorts of different places of the world and walks of life. And you can show yourself what's possible. When you see what's possible, you can get inspired and excited. That's not going to be enough, but that's going to start you on the journey of creating a vision for yourself beyond your situation, beyond your circumstances. So I had a vision of how I wanted my life and how I wanted my future to be. I didn't want to be limited by my physicality. I wanted to be able to have a relationship. I wanted to ultimately become a father, to be someone who made a serious impact that was positive in the world. And I recognized that the choices I was making would stop all of that. But it wasn't giving things up as much as it was doing things in service of what I wanted to create. So you have to have a vision that's compelling, that gets you up early, that keeps you up late, that excites you, that keeps you inspired, that fuels you, that gets you charged up. And when you have that, it's very, very, very easy to stay consistent once you're making progress. So the second part is you have to have a pattern, a strategy that's intelligent. If you run the wrong way looking for the sunrise every day, you're eventually going to give up. I mean, you're just running in the wrong direction. And so it's not only being inspired and having a good vision, it's having an intelligent strategy. And so when someone comes to see me, I tell them, here's exactly what to do with food. Here's exactly what to do with exercise. And we make it incredibly boring so that Food no longer has that emotional charge that it once did in many of my clients' lives, where much of what a person's trying to accomplish through food actually gets satisfied by the things that are meant to be accomplished by, like relationships. If you're 30 and you haven't been on a date and you are looking around and most of the people your age have families and have a career that's meaningful and you feel like you're not measuring up, I don't think taking something that takes away that sense of discomfort is the first path I would recommend. I would say, why not bring yourself up to what you really want? I mean, I guess you could turn off your drive and just say, well, this is the way it's going to be, but that's not the path I would recommend. I would suggest, why don't you upgrade your actual approach to life to match the blueprint you have? Obviously, you have, even if it's not articulated, an idea of where or how your life should be. And something about your experience doesn't match that. So you're not feeling good. Well, what I help people to do in coaching is actually get their behaviors to match the map they have of the world they want and start to move in that direction quickly.
The way that I think about behavior change, the most difficult part of behavior change is that the short-term rewards or consequences don't match the long-term rewards or consequences. And so if I were to drink, I really love this beer, this called Pliny the Elder. It's a strong beer. If I were to drink that IPA right now, just if I were to just chug that while we're talking, I'd feel really good, actually. It's a really great feeling. But then I would feel poorly. I'd feel poorly later. I'd get cranky later on today. I'd sleep poorly. But my brain really, this prehistoric part of my brain is only saying, hey, you took that sip and you feel good. And we can look at the opposite of this and say, if I were to eat the steamed broccoli right now, the benefit is delayed, right? I actually like broccoli. So, okay, it tastes okay. But the benefit of that is not something that's just hitting me immediately. There's a delayed benefit there. And so much of addiction, I come from a background of addiction, so I think about addiction a lot. And so much of developing healthy habits, the crux of it is kind of convincing yourself to do something that might not feel amazing in that moment. You know, the first 10 minutes of a run are kind of rough. And reminding yourself that you're going to feel good after the run, you're going to feel good tomorrow, you're going to sleep better, et cetera. And the disconnect between like the pain or the pleasure and the action is a very difficult thing to overcome. So how in your system or in your working with your clients are you overcoming what I would think of as like the first 10 minutes kind of rule of exercising or the first few bites of eating the broccoli instead of the cookie?
I understand your question. And the question I would ask you to ponder, and I would ask a client if he or she were to ask me the very same thing, would be this. What's wrong with how you're feeling right now? What's wrong with being as you are now? What is it that we need to do? Why is it that we need to do anything to change the way things are at the moment? Well, I'd really like to have this instead of that. If you stop and you actually look into what is leading you to want to go down that path, it can often give you an opportunity, kind of a gap, to make a better choice or actually respond instead of just kind of impulsively react and do whatever you've conditioned yourself to do. But there has to be a space to do that. And because we live in a culture that's just coming at us from every which way with everything, with such intensity and at such a frenetic pace, it's sometimes difficult to have that space to just sit with being. How many of us will go to a restaurant and look across the dining room to see a couple seated across from one another, mindlessly scrolling their phones when there's someone right in front of them? Why? What is it that's still pressing that requires us to pick up a device and to start to gaze into it? So what I would offer someone to stop and do first is ask themselves the question, what am I not allowing myself to feel right now? Why do I, if you have a history of addiction, I have many clients that are incredible proponents of the 12-step program and find it very helpful. You might want to ask yourself, what am I avoiding feeling? What am I not letting myself in on right now?
Taking a moment and saying, okay, I'm feeling something. Why am I feeling this way? What is it? And am I okay if I just continue to feel this way?
Let's go down that path for a moment. There are a tremendous number of young people who grew up in households that weren't afforded a good enough holding environment. And by holding environment, I mean a place that offers enough attention, enough acceptance, enough appreciation, enough affection that's appropriate, and enough space for all of what it means to feel and be human. Well, if we don't get an opportunity to install those things in ourselves, a lot of what you see come up in adulthood is a reaction to that. And so a lot of the work with me in my office is helping a person become for themselves the type of parent in a way that they wish they would have had when they were younger.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I can see it. It's this classic, like you wouldn't talk to somebody else the way that we we talk to ourselves. And the way that we talk to ourselves really matters. Okay. And then, so I think maybe you're not going to love this question, but I will ask it anyways. But what is the diet you're recommending? Like what should we eat?
Sure. Well, I want to use the word diet to refer to much more than food. So much of what we choose to eat is influenced by factors that have nothing to do with what we put in our mouth. Who are we spending time with? Are we reading? What are we listening to? What are we watching? What aren't we watching? What aren't we listening to? What aren't we reading? So consumption is the way I would think about this. So what I recommend for people is to come up with a strategy that's simple and sustainable. The best diet is one you can keep with. And so it's all about coming up with something, a pattern that's going to integrate into your life, but it's not working it around your life. It's prioritizing your own well-being and working everything else around it. I have a lot of people this time of year that'll reach out, having been inspired by a client who's lost 50, 60, 80, 100 pounds, and they'll say, is now really a good time to start? It is the holiday season. There's always a holiday. There's always a special occasion. And if you wait until everything's just perfect, you're going to be waiting forever. There's never a perfect time. I always tell people the perfect time was yesterday. The second best time is today, because you don't have forever. Both of us are relatively young, and it's very easy to operate under the illusion of infinity, that you have forever, that we're going to be immortal, that time's never going to come for us. And the reality is it comes for each and every one of us. No one escapes it. And what you want to recognize is, with that sense of urgency, you want to be making choices that minimize the probability you're going to have a lot of regret. The thing that I see most common amongst the people that are the most sad as they near the latter part of their life is those people that feel like they have the most significant amount of regret that could have been minimized if they were done things differently. And so I always ask a client when they come in here, if I didn't see you for a year, obviously there's a number of things that you already regret. But if I weren't to encounter you for another year and we were to bump into each other 12 months from now, what would you have to do today so that you would not have accrued any additional regrets beyond what you already had? What could you do now so that a year from now, that stack of regret will not have grown at all? And that's a really good question to ask yourself if you're wanting to start to change the New Year approaches. What could I do now that would allow for there to be no more new regrets in my stack? Because we all have things that we feel we could have done differently, should have done differently, whatever. Can't undo those things. But we can begin to live in a way that doesn't allow for those to amount to even more, to grow.
But even as you say that, there is a freeing feeling of you're giving yourself permission actually to do a whole bunch of things you want to do. Like when you ask me that question, I'm like, oh, I've been wanting to do this ride. You can do these dirt bike tours from basically like San Diego to Cabo. I'm like, maybe I just do that and I'll be taking care of myself. It'll be in the regret minimization framework. But there is a freedom of, if you are doing things, and you don't want to have any regrets, there's a whole bunch of fun things, on that list. It's not just, I'm going to eat a bunch of spinach, so I didn't eat poorly. The other thing I like that you're saying is, and I agree with, you really got to pay attention to what works for you. The right diet is the diet that you stick to. And I like you're using the term diet more broadly than just to refer to food, but figure out the things that are going to be nourishing for your body that you enjoy. And if you don't like the Brussels sprouts, then all right, don't eat the Brussels sprouts. What matters is that you're sticking to it, and not that it's some very specific thing that you're eating and choking down. Actually, the choking it down is probably counterproductive.
We have to accept the given that when we want to accomplish or achieve anything of significance in our life, the price for that is sacrifice. If you don't think that's true, you're kidding yourself. So you are going to have to do things that you prefer not to. You want to be a parent? Guess what? You're the one that gets to wake up at 2:30 when the baby won't stop crying. You're the one that gets to change. Well, I'll take all the good and delete all the bad. That just doesn't work. I mean, that's just not the way life is set up. And we live in a culture right now. Unfortunately, I'm not sure it's unique to our specific generation. It just feels more prevalent, just probably because of just how vocal things have become and how well communication has evolved over time. We get so much information all the time and we hear everyone's opinions, even those people we prefer not to hear. uh, the fact is that you're going to have to make sacrifices for those things that you feel are valuable and that matter. And so a lot of this is all about maturing. It's about becoming an adult. It's about recognizing, yes, you can have better health. Yes, you can have more self-esteem, more confidence. The price for those things is discipline, is consistency, but it's not a standalone. You can have scaffolding help. That's why I do what I do. I recognize that there was something missing. I needed something that would come along and that would say to me those things that I wish I would have had some authority say to me when I was a kid. And I became that person. I built this guy. So in many ways, we can each do that for ourselves. I really encourage anyone who's younger, and by young, I mean in their adolescent years, early adulthood, to work to do all they can to learn from those people that have the life that they aspire to have, but then quickly become the authority in their own life. Don't give your power to some guru, to some person with, 400 million followers or whatever. Recognize that you're the best expert on your own life and that you have a mission to learn and evolve and to grow. And the way you do so is by making certain errors and mistakes, but then quickly admitting them to yourself and recovering from those things and becoming a more informed version of yourself as a function of that. I think that we live in a curated world where we're seeing a snapshot of other people's lives and we assume that it's all the way that they are saying it is, and it's not. And no one's putting out the argument they had with their partner last night or their kids screaming they hate them or, people are putting these perfect pictures and things up there. And unfortunately, that misleads a lot of us into thinking that we need to compare and contrast ourselves to other people. The best person to compare and contrast yourself to is who you were a year ago. Have you learned more? Have you become more loving? Have you become more attentive? Have you become more present? Have you become more accepting? Are you showing affection? Are you being for yourself who you wish someone else would have been? Are you, in your words, saying the types of things to yourself that you would say to your best friend? Or are you a person who's incredibly hypercritical, who feels like their history is coming for them and they just have to keep moving at a crazy pace that ultimately is going to rob them of the life they want?
Yeah, it reminds me, there's been something that's been really helpful for me around envy. So I really appreciate what you're saying around, hey, sacrifice is required. And, we're going to be sacrificing either way. There are things we're sacrificing if we're making the decisions that are not good for us. There's things we're sacrificing if we're making the decisions that are good for us. I mean, we're sacrificing actually way more if we're making the decisions, these kind of short-term decisions around things that aren't good for us. But there's a strategy, I forget who gave me this around envy, which is you don't get to pick and choose. You have to take the whole thing. So let's say I've got, there's a person for me in my life who's this very successful career-wise and he's accomplished all these things that I would like to accomplish during my life. And so it's very easy to pick and choose what you're envious of. Okay, I want his accolades and I want this and I want that. But do I want his age? No, he's 20 years older than I do. Do I want his wife? No, I love my wife. Do I want his kids? Of course not. I love my kids. And so it's look, feel free to envy, but it's got to be a full swap. And there's another way of saying this, Warren Buffett would give up everything with any 21-year-old to have the time and to be rich in time in front of you. There is no greater form of wealth. And so, I love this theme around sacrifice.
That which we admire and envy in others is usually a signal of something that we haven't actuated in ourselves. So when we notice something we really feel excited about witnessing in another person, it often is pointing us at some aspect of ourselves that we're unwilling to acknowledge. Just as well, the flip side to that coin is the negative. When we experience in someone that we find for any reason to be very annoying. Like he's too controlling. I hate, man, he's just so controlling. It usually is a good pointer that you aren't aware of your own controlling nature. So what we admire and what we despise, what we are seeing outside of us is usually a good mirror for us to look inward and say, are we really aware of those aspects of ourselves?
What is your approach to structure and routine? How do you think very tactically about, okay, I haven't been exercising, but now I need to spend X amount of time exercising. All right, I would assume that you would advise your clients to make choices about the meals they're going to eat ahead of time, not in the moment.
When a person comes to see me, and by the way, anyone listening, my first book goes into great detail about this specific topic. It's called Think and Grow Thin. And I outline the roughly 90-day plan that clients often follow. We take all of the thought out of it ahead of the time so that a person actually is following the same framework day in and day out. So it's not think about the choice before you go out to lunch. It's you've already decided 2 weeks ago, here's what I eat every day. So there's no spontaneity at all. So spontaneity becomes the enemy in this whole process. We become strategic rather than spontaneous. So it's all about being absolutely consistent, strategic, methodical, so that it's like brushing your teeth, putting gas in your car, getting dressed. It's just something you do. So it's about conditioning yourself for food no longer, again, has that emotional charge. Most of my clients are incredibly brilliant professionals. A huge percentage are medical doctors from all over the world, from some of the best institutions that you could possibly seek treatment from. These are people that don't have an issue with competency. It's an issue of actual follow through. It's an emotional gap. It's learning how to be able to tolerate the types of ambiguities that come up in life without using food, like I said earlier, as a treatment plan of sorts.
And so you're doing the same thing. So it's basically, okay, here's what you're going to be eating, and it's just set in stone. That's what you eat, and here's when you eat it, and here's how much of it you eat.
So you wake up every day. The first thing you do out of bed is you're going to go and you're going to do your walking. You get the exercise knocked out at a time that's not going to be interfered with. And then you set up a schedule of eating. So you eat about every 2.5 to 3 hours. So you're never vulnerable to being overly sensitive to your appetite, and you stick with it. So I always tell people weight loss is the dividend of my work. It's not the focus. It's consistency and no longer using food reactively, impulsively, which frees up so much emotional energy to actually enrich your life in the ways that matter, that most often were the genesis of the problem in the first place. Most people aren't going to eat the types of foods I was eating as an adolescent because their life is just so great and they're so happy and they have such deep, meaningful relationships and their sex life is awesome and their kids are doing great. No, it's usually there are a lot of things that are out of order. And so if you'll clear space to actually look at what the hell is going on, and I'm no therapist, I'm a coach, and look at this in a real pragmatic way, where are the issues that are actually troubling you? And what can be done to start to rectify, address those things? Well, you find that the issues around food many times evaporate on their own.
How are you thinking about on the exercise, like strength cardio?
Oh, I think both are incredibly important. At that point, the devil's in the details. When a person has never been to a gym before and is terrified of walking through those doors, there's something to be said for appreciating timing. What is that person actually ready for? Because the one thing you don't want to do is give a person an experience that is so painful, and I don't mean physically, I mean emotionally, so overwhelming that it threatens their ability to be able to be consistent and get beyond that. Not everyone can do that. And I had to recognize that years and years ago. This saying, a very elderly woman said to me, who was like a grandmother, she said, if a person could do better, they would do better. And I said, what are you talking about? Everyone can do better. You know, I was Mr. Ambitious 22-year-old. And you recognize life has a way of knocking you in the face, punching you in the mouth. And if you haven't had that happen, you will. So the reality is you're going to realize that there's going to be things that come up that really are tragic. And you have to have a connection with something greater than yourself. And I think that something greater would be love, compassion, connection, a recognition of the connectedness that we all have with each other. And I think if you can maintain that sense, then you can direct a person what seems to be the most sensible, direction. So if a person came in, let's say a 14-year-old came in my office who had 200 pounds to lose, I'm not going to take a full metal jacket approach with that person and traumatize them by throwing them with a trainer and this and that. It's going to be a totally different approach. And that's something we all learn as we mature as helpers. I don't have a formulaic approach with every person. As I did today to our talk, I don't have some agenda. I don't have notes sitting here. I just sit and talk. And so you have to have a certain trust in yourself to attend to things that come up. And if someone's listening to this and doesn't know where to start, the first place to start is with your food. If you have 20, 30, 50, 100, 200 pounds to lose, you've got to take a high resolution look at what the hell you're doing with food and get that in order. That's, I would say, 80% of it from a mechanical perspective. And then 20% in terms of fat loss, would be a combination of the cardio. I would do cardio every day. And if you have the time to integrate some weight training, go for it. It has all sorts of positive benefits. I mean, that's well documented in all the literature.
And then what's your view? I know you're not a doctor, but I would assume you have an opinion on the GLP-1s, on the Ozempics and the Wegovy's, on the medication-assisted weight loss.
So I think medications have all sorts of application, kind of like aspirin is great for a headache. But the one place I don't think it has much room in is losing and maintaining weight loss for the reasons I mentioned. I think that medication is great for any number of things. I think that with weight loss, again, you want to think about weight as more or less, to use medical terminology, a symptom, not the problem. It is the symptom of the problem. Now, are there people that literally, they absolutely need some type of dramatic intervention? Certainly. And those people need to address the issues in a clinical way with the help of whatever is going to be life savings. For most of us, I think that when we find we're at a place that our weight has become as big of an issue as it once was for me, no pun intended, the only way that you're going to achieve sustainable change is addressing what led to the issue in the first place. It doesn't mean having to rehash it in therapy for 11 years. And I am certainly a proponent of good therapy, but I'm suggesting it's really coming down to recognizing if things are going to change, it's going to be because you change your choices. And the way you address the issues that led you down this path in the first place, when they come up again, you're going to have a far more sophisticated approach to addressing those things. Otherwise, you can lose the weight doing any number of things. But what's going to happen when life happens again? If you go through a divorce, if your house burns down, if you lose your job, if you lose a child, if your primary path to tending to emotional pain has been using food the way I once did, you'd have to ask yourself, what's going to be your plan once the weight's off?
Yeah, I think I share some of your concern. I mean, it does seem we've had a number of endocrinologists on the show and different docs, and it does seem that the Ozempics, they might be a bit of a miracle drug in a bunch of different ways. And so I don't want to say that that they're totally incorrect in that. But I do worry about medications and solutions that do not address the underlying causes. The medications for anxiety are in this category. I can take a Xanax and I feel less anxiety. It's not doing anything about whatever caused the anxiety in the first place. Maybe somebody would argue that Ozempic is different.
Everyone's going to do what they're ultimately going to do. I tend to be of the opinion, given my life experience, and having a number of clients already at these very early days of such treatment in my office who have done those medications only to regress, as any of us can do from any approach, that it's still, again, there's still something missing with that approach. I think the part that's missing is what you and I are talking about. You have to be willing to look a little bit more deeper into these issues. But to your point, we live in a culture that's kind of a microwave culture. We want what we want, when we want it, how we want it at this moment, if not yesterday. And so that's unfortunately just not the way nature works. You can slow your appetite. You can reduce your awareness of it. You can slow digestion. But again, the question that I haven't heard discussed much, which I've pondered, but I haven't given too much thought to, is if our theory, Brent, your and my theory of food being kind of a treatment plan is accurate in a major sense. If that no longer works for a person who has the types of issues that you and I are describing, that is someone who's morbidly obese, but they're still having the same discomfort, the same emotional pain, but food doesn't quench that thirst anymore, what's that going to lead them to do? Now, some might say, well, their life quality is going to have improved so much because they'll have lost weight that everything will get better. Well, do you think that the weight was the cause of the issue? So my whole point being, I'm concerned not only about sustainability, but also what behaviors are going to emerge if this does work in the sense of continuing to take the medication that people don't use food the way they were. What's that going to lead people to choose to do in the absence of food?
Charles, so thank you so much for coming on. I mean, I find you very inspirational, and I love the way you're such a systems thinker and the way in which you talk about your system. It's so approachable. So tell us where we can find you.
Easiest way is my website, charlesdeangelo.com. If you're interested in coaching and I still am accepting new clients, you just put in your name, your email address, phone number, either myself or a member of the team will reach out. And if you're looking for my books, you can go to amazon.com. The first one about weight loss is Think and Grow Thin, and it was published in 2012. And the latter book is called Inner Guru, and it's more about personal development issues we touched on today.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
The Most Days Show is recorded in Boulder, Colorado, sometimes San Francisco, California, produced by Patrick Godino, music by Patrick Lee, and hosted by yours truly, Brent Franson, founder and CEO of Most Days.